This hour, we want to do some things which I think would be an encouragement to you, especially if you've lost a loved one, if you're a widow. But also want to salute those of you that have served in the military as we talk now with Kris Emmert. New book out, Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. And we're going to talk about her story and the ongoing ministry that she's had over the years. A very powerful message that she gives to groups, and you'll have a chance to hear that in just a minute. In terms of kind of a loss of kind of a life-changing encounter. Graduated with a bachelor's degree in communications from Wake Forest University, has a master's degree in communication from Regent University, a very skilled speaker, an individual that also has had her talents as a senior leader in premier designs, and mom to 4 children, grandmother, and just an incredible communicator. So, Kris, welcome to Point of View.
Thank you, Kirby. I'm so happy to be here with you.
Well, again, anybody that's watched you on video, and I have, and of course we have a link to your website so people can watch some of the things that you have done, knows that you're an incredible communicator. But I think we also just need to get to know you a little better before we get into all the wonderful teaching and preaching and speaking that you've done. And along the way, we've got to tell a really sad story. So start from the beginning if you can, because I think people need to get to know a little bit more about Kris and how she kind of came to the position that you find yourself in today.
Absolutely. The story really goes back 25 years ago, Kirby, and I was really living the perfect life. I was married to a lieutenant commander, a naval aviator, and we were based out of Norfolk, Virginia. I was a stay-at-home mom. I had just finished my master's degree at Regent University, and I was at home with our children. We had 2 little girls, and I was getting ready to really start my PhD program to be a professor, but my husband was getting ready to deploy. He was on the USS Theodore Roosevelt, and he was with an E-2C Hawkeye Squadron, the VAW 124 Bear Aces, and they were getting ready to deploy for 6 months. So we decided that I was just going to be at home with the girls. They were 3 and 7 months old, and just do the Navy wife thing while he was gone out to sea, and then when he returned home, we were going to start the PhD program and pursue my career. And it was 2 weeks into the deployment, and I was just at home. It was a Friday morning, and I saw naval officers come by my dining room window. I saw the stripes on their sleeves. And I had just dropped my 3-year-old daughter off at preschool, and I had my little 7-month-old baby sitting in her high chair. I was feeding her a snack, and I saw those stripes going by our windows. And by the time I got to the door and opened the door, I saw these naval officers standing there with just tears streaming down their face. And it was one of those moments when it's a naval aviator's wife's worst nightmare. And my husband had always kind of teased about it. He had always said, you know, if you see naval officers come into your door, they're coming to tell you that my plane has crashed. And he would joke about it, and I would say, oh, stop it. And he would always say, well, I do fly the safest aircraft in the Navy, because he flew the E-2, which was pretty slow, turboprop engined aircraft. It wasn't a fast F-14 Tomcat by any means. And when I went to the door, my life just completely shattered in front of me. And my perfect little life just completely fell apart. And I went in an instant, went from being a stay-at-home mom and a Navy wife to being a single mom and a Navy widow. And I was 31 years old.
Well, and again, you also talk about your spiritual pilgrimage and all of that.
Absolutely.
Which is something which for a second might shock some people because you're a Christian. You've been at Regent University, which is a great place. I've taught there once as well, and you obviously would be a fairly mature Christian. But all of a sudden you're saying, you know, where's God in the midst of all of this? Explain that if you might.
Exactly. Well, in my book, I really talk about me being a checklist Christian.
Yes.
And I really took my faith as almost an insurance policy that, okay, I'm a Christian, I'm not going to go to hell, but I was really calling the shots in my life. The Lord was not the Lord of my life. I was Lord of my life. I had myself on the throne, and I felt that if I did everything I was supposed to do and check all the boxes and walked through just the life that he had planned out for me, really just making my own way, then I was okay. And my husband and I, we sang in the choir. We taught preschool mission friends on Wednesday nights. We were part of a Bible study, but I did not really have an intimate walk with Jesus Christ. And it really took this shattering, life-changing crisis of belief to occur in my life for me to get on my knees and say, okay, Lord, where is my faith? Is my faith real? Are you who you say you are? And I had to go through that journey, and that's what I talk about in the book, is what do you do with God when life doesn't turn out the way you thought it was going to turn out? What do you do with God when you prayed every single night that my husband was deployed? My little girls and I would pray for Daddy's safety.
Yes.
In his airplane, Daddy's safety while he's on the boat, Daddy's safety, and then all of a sudden I have to look into the eyes of my 3-year-old daughter and say, okay, Daddy's plane broke, which it really didn't. To this day, we don't know the cause of the crash. But I had to look into the eyes of my 3-year-old daughter and say, Daddy's never coming home again. And how do I explain a loving God to her? How do I explain a loving God to my 7-month-old baby who will never know her father? So it was really interesting, the journey that I had to go through, and that's what I bring to the table in this book. And it's for those people out there that are struggling with the whys in life, and they may not exactly have a crisis of belief like I did. They may not have a husband that was lost at sea. They never found my husband. He's still in the bottom of the ocean, and they never found the cause of the mishap. But people are dealing with questions of heartache and sorrow and loss all across the world, and especially for believers and non-believers as well, they have those questions of where is God when our life is shaken apart.
Again, we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk a little bit about my folded flag and certainly the whole question of how will I get through and from triggers to moving on and all sorts of very important things that are in the book. And this would be certainly a book that you would want to put in the hands of individuals that are asking the question why. But also, as I started the program today, I wanted to also say this would be something that would be maybe an encouragement for those of you that serve in the military. We honor you so often when we can. We talk about how we'll never be able to thank you enough for your service, but this is, again, an incredible story, Providing Promise, a Navy widow's journey to hope. And if you've ever seen a picture of Kris Emmert, you see her almost always holding a folded flag, and she, as you will see some of the videos, uses the flag to speak to the issue of our freedom and what we enjoy today and, frankly, take for granted too often. So we're going to take a break. We'll continue our conversation with her, and we'd love to hear from some of you as we go along. 1-800-351-1212. We salute those of you in the military, and we welcome your phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
As we approach the November midterm elections, it's worth mentioning once again the need for states and local jurisdictions to clean up their voter rolls. The recent special election in Ohio was yet another reminder of the fact that there is still a lot of work to be done. The race between Republican Troy Balderson and Democratic Danny O'Connor ended up being very close. That means the counting of absentee ballots and provisional ballots will be important and could make the difference. Close elections like this illustrate the need for accurate voter rolls and the need for voter ID. One expert with the Government Accountability Institute reports that there are 170 registered voters in Ohio's 12th congressional district that were listed as being over 116 years old. In case you're wondering, the world's oldest living person is a 115-year-old resident of Japan. You would think that that fact alone would be reason enough to start cleaning up the voter rolls and to implement voter ID. But just look at the responses on Twitter when Shannon Bream of Fox News posted her tweet about 170 voters in Ohio race over 116 years old. Or look at the response when talk show host Kevin McCullough posted that this was an argument for voter ID. The responses range from claims that voter ID is racist and elitist to those who point to voter fraud that led to the election of Donald Trump. That one got me. On the one hand, they believe that Russian tampering led to the illegitimate election of the president, but also believe that there is no possibility that election fraud could occur in the recent congressional special election. One report estimates that there are 248 counties in this country that have more names on the voter rolls than the total number of people of voting age in those counties. That's too much opportunity for mischief. It is time to clean up the voter rolls. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Privileged to have with us today Kris Emmert, and again, the book is entitled Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. And if you'd like to know more information about her, we have a website, providingpromise.com, which gives you all sorts of great information, a way that you can contact her, find out about the book, and schedule her to speak, and we'll certainly talk more about some of those opportunities in just a minute. But Kris, there are two poignant pictures on your book about holding a flag. The front, where you have a smile on your face holding that folded flag, but the other one, which is deep inside here, where you're holding a flag after, of course, your husband has died. And I think it just illustrates again that in almost every picture I've ever seen of you, you have a flag in your hands. But again, two different sets of circumstances, aren't they?
Right, absolutely. The front cover was taken, obviously, in front of an ocean, because John was lost at sea. The crew was lost at sea, and I thought that was very important to have the ocean behind me. And then, of course, my folded flag representing military and those that are lost. But the smile is I'm providing promise, which means I'm giving the reader hope. And even though all the other photographs that you see with my flag, it's grieving, it's sorrow, it's loss, but Jesus gives us hope, and that's what I want to give to my readers, really. I want them to know, even though I'm holding a folded flag, and it's such a hard, awful tragedy to talk about, but through the Lord, I found hope again, because He is our provider, just like your previous guest talked about how the Lord is our provider. And He provides promises to us, and that's really how the front cover came to being.
Let's talk about what it took to get through that, because that's, of course, part of your book as well. Just the idea of the moment you took us to that powerful scene where these two officers meet you at the door,
right,
to a point where you have to begin to pull your life back together again, and you have a whole chapter there. How did you get through it, and how do you get through? You have, of course, next to the picture of your children next to Daddy's Arlington National Cemetery marker, because all it is a marker since we never recovered the body. So talk
right,
about what it took to get through that, because that is something I think is a lesson that we can pass on to everyone listening right now that's gone through some kind of loss. It may not be the same loss that you face, but all of us have to, from time to time, face some pretty significant losses in our life. How did you get through it?
right. Thank you for asking that. That's when I speak, I really address that. The first thing, obviously, is I really had to hold on to the truth, and the truth is that God loves me. And so many times when you're going through heartache, people want to turn their back on the Lord, and they want to, out of bitterness and anger, and they want to just do it their own way and say, forget it, you allow this to happen to me in my life. But really, the Bible tells us that he's never going to leave us or forsake us, and that when we go through the fire, we're not going to be burned. And he's the husband to the husbandless and the father to the fatherless. And even though I had to struggle with my faith, I hung on to the truth. And that's the first thing, is I really ask people that are struggling is just hold on to Christ, hold on to your Savior, because he's there to comfort us in those trials. But another area that I feel is very important is the feeling of community, and it's opening your heart to other people. And God uses his people to minister to the hurting and to the wounded. And I refer those people to the True Blues in the book, or also Rays of Sunshine. And it's miraculous to see right when you think you can't take another step, right when you think you cannot breathe again, the Lord brings someone or something into your life that gives you that hope to carry on. And I really stayed connected to my church family. And again, I have seen over the years when I've worked with many widows in different situations that going back to church is probably the hardest thing that they can ever do if they are believers, and if they do have a local church they attend. They really struggle with that because families are intact, or they look like they're intact.
Mm-hmm.
And that was very difficult to go back into the church where my husband and I sang in the choir together, and I see all these daddies carrying their children around after services, and I know that these families are going home to a roast in the oven, or they're going out to eat with other families. And for those who are struggling with loss and bitterness and grief, it's very difficult to do. But I found that staying connected to a group of people, a community, is so vital to the healing process. And one of the things that was very helpful for me was we established a support system. It was a young widow support system in the Norfolk area. And by the time we had really got it going, there was probably about 15 or 16 of us military widows, and we even had a young widower part of our group. He had lost his wife. She was a flight attendant in a commercial airline mishap. And that community, again, helped us to be able to move forward, to know that we were not alone and that other people could understand what we were going through. And that was another really, really important part of our healing, was that we had each other.
And I was just thinking that in some respects, the military does provide some of that. I've lived in Virginia Beach when I taught it. Back then it was called CBN University, and some of that. And so I understand what it's like to be in Norfolk, Virginia Beach, that area. The difficulty, Kris, oftentimes is that if you don't have that military connection, because I think they do bring together kind of a band of brothers or sisters or others together, sometimes it is real easy if you're not in a church or if you're not in a group like a military to feel very isolated. And at that point, you've really got to challenge some of these widows and widowers and some of these people that have lost a loved one to reach out. And to, when somebody says, if there's anything that I can do to help you, you need to come back and say, okay, I really need you to help me, because sometimes we try to be self-sufficient and isolated, don't we?
Right, and you put that smile on your face because you don't want anybody to know how hurting you are. And that's the beauty of Grief Share. That's an organization, and one of the things that I'm going to be launching soon, I don't have it launched right now, but I'm working on providing Promise Ministries, and it is for a community to help men and women who are going through loss. And it's something I did want to bring up is loss is loss, and it doesn't even have to be a death. It could be a death of a marriage. It could be a divorce. It could be just loss of hope, loss of dreams. People are struggling today more than ever, and they feel so isolated. And, of course, social media feeds into that as well. And I'm seeing over the years that men and women need a point of connection where they don't feel like they're alone. And, of course, the local church is beautiful, and if we're doing what we're supposed to be doing as a local church, we will be reaching out to those that are hurting. But there's many organizations out there that provide support and love and connection for those who need some help.
Well, let's see if we can take a break. But when we come back, I wanted to, first of all, focus on some of the things that are on your website. So if people wanted to come and have you speak, that would be the case. But you also have sections on, the triggers that sometimes come. Of course, you have a picture of the wreckage, there's very little of it, in your hands. And then later on, even a time in which you decided, maybe I need to even go into that particular stateroom that my husband, John, actually lived in. And so I wanted to kind of take us through some of those stories which is part of yours. But at the same time, I want to also give some of our listeners a chance to maybe ask a question or make a comment. And so if you would like to join us today, we're talking with Kris Emmert about her book, Providing Promise, A Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. That is certainly available. We have a link to providingpromise.com. And as we go to the break, you might go and, if you have access to a computer, check that, because then you can find out more about her, more about the book, and even contact her, because we've yet to talk about the opportunity where she could come perhaps and speak at your event. And there's some videos there that you can watch, which I think will give you a better idea of how she communicates to individuals and how she might be used by you. So if you'd like to join us, that number is 1-800-351-1212. The book is available, and if you would like to get a copy of it, 430 pages, so it covers a lot of material that you certainly would benefit from as well. And, of course, we also have a link so that if you'd like to get it, you can find that on the websites as well. So let me take the time right now to take a break, step away from the microphone for just a minute. When we'll come back, we'll talk first about what's on the website and pick up some more pieces of the life of Kris Emmert. All that coming up right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Kris Emmert. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Saluting those of you that have served in the military, especially some of you that maybe, like her, ended up being a widow because of an individual that you were married to actually paid the ultimate sacrifice for our freedom. And so we certainly want to emphasize that today. And if you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Book is entitled Providing Promise. We have information about it on our website, but we also have a link to your website, providingpromise.com. Kris, for just a few minutes, talk about all the resources that are available on that website, because, of course, they can get a copy of the book. They can learn more about you and some of the various things that you're developing. And I would certainly encourage people that are looking for a speaker for their event. You would certainly be somebody that they would want to consider, and you have some videos there for them to watch, don't you?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. And I want to also specify that it does not necessarily have to be a military-related event. I've been speaking for women's ministry and conferences and so forth for over 20 years. But my story is really a story of hope, and so I use the story to basically start off any type of talk just so that people know a little bit about my background. But, I am honored when I get an opportunity to speak. I'll speak to large venues as well as small Bible studies. I even spoke to a group of ladies that met at a Shoney's the other day. So I'm open to wherever God leads, really.
And you are a very gifted communicator, and I would encourage people just watch the video. They don't have to take my word for it. They can see it themselves. We might get a phone call or two in just a minute, but let's come back to a couple of issues, and that is one of those. Let's just talk about the pieces. You know, there is something that's really striking to see that there are just a few pieces from John's plane. And even during the break, we were watching some video here of an E-2 Hawkeye landing on an aircraft carrier and that kind of thing. So it gives me a sense about what he was going through. But it's interesting that you've had even your co-author talk about what it was like when you handed to Julie a few pieces from John's plane. There's something that is kind of striking, but also it sort of triggers all sorts of emotions again, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. What happened was the aircraft, the main part of the aircraft, was never recovered. It flew into the Ionian Sea approximately a mile off of the carrier. And so because it was fairly close to the carrier, the crewmen on the aircraft carrier were able to retrieve some of the wreckage that had floated to the top. And not a whole lot had floated to the top, just some, but they were able to retrieve that. So the 5 families that lost their loved ones on that aircraft, it was VAW 124 Beret 603 was the name of it. We received pieces of the wreckage, at least to have something, just something to hold on to, because we never got our husbands' bodies back.
Right.
And so that was just something to hold on to, and I've carried those 2 pieces of wreckage around with me for 25 years, because that's almost as if it was my grave, I guess, or my marker. And so when I handed that to my co-author, and I really want to compliment her, she did all of the military writing in the book. She's an amazing, amazing writer, Julie Zoudre, from Johnson City, Tennessee. And she was the one that when I brought the wreckage to her, and of course I've been carrying it around for 25 years, but it really made an impact on her, and she became very emotional because of it, because then she realized what exactly we had gone through. And she did all of the military scenes. They are all vetted by retired naval aviators. We have admirals, captains, commanders, many, many naval personnel, chaplains. They read through these scenes to make sure they were accurate. So for the military person that's out there, this is a book for them as well. It really does honor the Navy. It honors our military, and I think they will enjoy it. It's not just my journey. It's also what is it like to fly an E-2? What is it like to live on an aircraft carrier?
Mm-hmm.
It's been interesting to talk to some of the officers who have read the book now, and they're very excited about it. In fact, it will be featured at the Tailhook Association in Nevada this
very
fall.
good. Yeah,
so
that's
I'm very
great.
excited about that.
Well, again, the book, Kris, of course, is the author, but we also mentioned Julie. I might mention the foreword by Dr. Bob Record, who's a good friend, too. And are you open, Kris, to take some phone calls?
Absolutely.
Okay,
yes.
well, let's head to Texas first. KAVX, Gloria. I understand you're a widow, so you have the floor. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you very much. I just wanted to express how much I appreciate this young woman. I am a widow now, just recently, and my husband was in the Navy and served on submarines. He just recently passed away at age 79, and I didn't know what it was to be a widow or why the Word of God would say that Jesus is a defender of the widow.
Yes.
None of that meant anything to me all these years as a Bible teacher and a Christian that followed Jesus, but all of a sudden the Word of God became really alive to me, and I'm understanding the true meaning of the grace that keeps on giving us strength and is always sufficient for every need we have.
Absolutely.
So I'm thinking, we were in the Navy when the submarine went down years ago, and many, many widows, many families without their loved one. And my husband was on the submarines too, so that hit home too. But I just wanted to thank you for offering this wonderful hope and help to these young widows. I can't, all of us have a different journey, and I'm so very thankful that we served in the military for 20 years, and then my husband lived to be 79. So
that's a
wonderful
blessing. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, my condolences to you, and thank you for your service as well.
Thank you so much.
Well, again,
You're
as we've
welcome.
said, we thank any one of you that have served in any of the armed forces. Of course, we're talking about Navy at the moment, but any of those certainly are where we, again, want to express our appreciation for you and your service. And while we talk about that holding some of those pieces, you do talk about in the book, Kris, the triggers. And one obvious trigger is the wreckage in my hands, which is, of course, one of the chapters in your book. But you also talk about from triggers to moving on. Certain things set you off, and it's like you think you're getting over your grief, and then something else triggers a whole wave of feelings of grief. Speak to that, if you might.
Right, emotions, right. Anybody who's walked through grief will definitely understand this. An example would be when I would go to the grocery store, and, of course, I still had military benefits, so I would go to the commissary on base, and I would walk in the commissary, and then in walks a man wearing a flight suit, and I would just completely fall apart. Just the image of a naval officer, a flight suit, an aviator, and even thinking about it gets me choked up just because it was a trigger, and all of a sudden I thought, okay, I'm doing good, I'm moving on, I'm accepting my new normal, and boom, I'd be falling apart. Or let's say I would even hear the sound of the E-2 flying over my house. And the E-2 has a very distinct sound,
Yes.
and we've been referred to it as a hummer. And I would be in the kitchen cooking dinner or playing with my children, and next thing I know, I would hear that sound, and then there again, I would just completely fall apart. And grief is very ugly, and it's very unforgiving because it doesn't really care about what you're doing or where you are, and you could be in the middle of, whatever. You could be in the middle of work, and all of a sudden a trigger happens, and you're just a crying mess. And so that's another thing about where I talk about your true blues, your friends.
Right.
You need to have that group of people that understand that, and when you're falling apart, they get it. They're not going to be critical of you. They're just going to love you and comfort you right there in the second. And then it goes away, and then you're back smiling and living your day. It's just that I refer to it in the book as being thrown down the steps. You get up, and if you're having a really hard day with grief, it's almost like grief wants to throw you down the steps, and you try to get up, and it throws you down the steps a couple more times.
Sure.
So for anybody that's walking through that, I know that they'll understand that part.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we will continue our conversation for a few more minutes with Kris Emmert. The book is entitled Providing Promise, a Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. We also have a link to providingpromise.com so that you can even maybe read an excerpt from the book and also watch some of the videos we've talked about. And if you'd like to join us, we might slip in one more phone call, 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. A cake artist from Colorado, Jack Phillips, enjoys designing and creating works of art that you can eat. But like every good artist, Jack knows his limits. When asked to create a customized wedding cake for a relationship his faith does not recognize, he politely declined, just like he does when the confectionery request contemplates alcohol, drugs, or other elements that prick his conscience. Still, someone complained. That complaint turned into hearings before commissioners that were supposed to judge the complaint with neutrality. Instead, at least one of the commissioners disparaged Jack's faith, explaining religion has been used to justify all kinds of discrimination throughout history, including, he added, slavery and the Holocaust. He then intoned that Jack's faith is one of the most despicable pieces of rhetoric that people can use. Not surprisingly, Jack lost his case. That is, until it went to the Supreme Court of the United States. There, by a vote of 7-2, the justices explained that the state of Colorado showed an obvious lack of neutrality toward the religion of one of its citizens. That, Justice Kennedy explained, was inappropriate for a commission charged with the solemn responsibility of fair and neutral enforcement of the law. No one in America should be forced by the government to choose between their faith and their livelihood, not even cake artists. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
I'm Kelly Shackelford, President and Chief Counsel of First Liberty Institute. Some people think our religious freedom will soon be gone, but that's not true. The fact is that First Liberty, a national network of America's top attorneys, is winning over 90% of our cases. We defend religious freedom for people like you. Go to firstliberty.org and read the exciting story. That's firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Kris Emmert as we talk about Providing Promise, a Navy Widow's Journey to Hope. You're talking about the true blues, and I thought there were two things I want to talk about before we run out of time. One is to talk about what people can say to you as a widow, and then what about your kids? And actually, there's a story that pulls both of those together, because you had somebody that moved next to you, and so they were actually asking something. They said, I heard that there's a young widow who lives here that lost her husband in a plane accident. Without missing a beat, I leaned in and whispered back, yes, that's me. a look of horror came across her face. Oh, no, I'm so sorry. And so then you talk about, how sometimes that's a faux pas. But then it gets worse because one day you heard your daughter, Jordan, deal with something because the little girl was asking, so your daddy died? The friend asked innocently. Yes, he did, Jordan replied without hesitation. At this point, you're kind of getting a little bit nervous. And the friend said, did he get eaten by a shark? At that point, you said, my heart froze on the spoon, tightened, and I vigorously stirred the dough in anger. What was the kid thinking? But Jordan said, no, because my daddy is down deep, deep, deep where the sharks don't go. But it, I think, relates to both of those issues, and that is, sometimes we don't know what to say to someone like you, a widow, and then you wonder, how do I deal with this with my kids? Can you give us any advice?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought up that story because
it's one of the ones where you have to laugh, even if it is kind of horrifying.
At the time, I was just appalled. I was appalled that this little girl, and she was so innocent. She was probably 4 or 5 years old, and it was a natural question. But what's interesting, Kirby, is the fact that I had that conversation with my daughter. What I would suggest to anybody is you just have to be truthful and honest about everything.
Right.
And nothing was hidden. And because I was so open about, okay, Daddy's in the bottom of the ocean, and we talked about the depth of the ocean, and the beauty of that, if there is beauty in this, is John and I were scuba divers, and I had gone down deep. I think I did a deep dive 120 feet, and I knew that the further down you go, the sea creatures don't go down that far. And so because of that knowledge, I was able to explain that to my daughter about her daddy. And because of that, she had that answer for that little girl. Yeah, the sharks don't go down that deep because my daddy's deep, deep, deep down in the ocean. And I just really felt that as honest as I could be with people. And then, some people, they don't know what to say, so they don't say anything, which is harmful as well. Or they would say things, oh, my goodness, like, oh, well, I guess God needed him in heaven more than he needed him here
these lines,
at home. And I went, what? You can't say those things to me. Why would a loving God take a man from his 2 little children? He was only 38 years old. So, sometimes it's just best not to say anything than to say something ridiculous. But you learn to just let it go off your shoulder and not take it to heart, because until someone has walked through a heartache or a tragedy, they really don't know how to respond.
Yes. Well, and again, sometimes just presence. We've talked about that before. I remember Joe Bailey wrote the book View from a Hearse, in which he lost a number of his children. I mean, just an incredibly tragic story. I won't go into all the details there, but he tells about 2 friends. One came in and told him all sorts of spiritual truths so that he knew, and he said, I couldn't wait for him to leave. Then he had another one that came and just, read a Bible verse and then listened to me, and we cried together. He said, and I hated for him to leave.
Right.
It's just so, and I think it was an illustration of, at this point, I don't need all the Bible verses. I don't need the platitudes. I don't need all the feel-good things to make you feel good. But if you can be a presence and show that you care, then yes, that's something that will be helpful to me as an individual. And back to the issue of your children, I've oftentimes thought that death is kind of like sex. We always say, well, we want to have the talk, with our kids. But that the talk is usually stimulated when you're driving in carpool and they say, Mommy, what's sex? And you go, I didn't expect that one to come up right then. But then you have to be honest and share. And the same thing, whether it's Jordan or any of your children or any of your friends that sometimes just ask the question, that's the time to share. And you had equipped her to actually give an answer, even while you were stirring that dough with a little bit of anger at the time. So anyway, we're just about out of time. Let me, before we do run out of time, talk about going to your website and finding out what individuals can find there. And the first thing I've mentioned of course, is there's information about you, information about the book, but there's a contact sheet, and that is something that people might want to use, because if they watch the videos, they recognize, as you said, you can certainly speak in military and patriotic settings, and you have some of those, but anybody that would want to have you come and speak to individuals that have faced loss or wondering about God's will in their life, you are available for that. So talk about what that could happen and how that could actually come about, because this book, as well as your speaking, are going to have a great ministry and already are having quite a ministry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, they can register on my website, providingpromise.com. They can do a speaking request on that website, or they can also email me at Kris@providingpromise.com. And I am scheduling churches, venues, events right now through the fall. I speak really throughout the week, on the weekends. I'm open to whatever. I'm going to Kentucky. I've got I'm speaking at a church, a women's luncheon in Norfolk. I have one scheduled for Richmond, Virginia. So, and I've got a church in California that's actually looking at their schedule right now. So I'm excited about the doors that God's opening through this, and I just want to offer hope. That's my thing. I met with Beth Moore, and I'll just say this really quickly. I had an opportunity to have her pray over the book, and I've been under her Bible studies for over 20 years. And I told her when she and I were talking after we prayed, I said, Beth, I really wrote this book for the one. There's that one person that's out there that needs hope, and they need to know they're not alone. And that's that one that's out there, and that's my prayer, is the one will read my story and be inspired and know that God has them and that they're special, and God created them with value and purpose, and He loves them dearly, and He wants to comfort them as they go through their trial, whatever that trial may be.
And again, let me just mention that you have a video that is about 3.5 minutes long that introduces you. And then you have the other video that you did more recently at Premier Designs, where you're holding the flag, and that's about 7 minutes long. So people can watch the videos and get a little bit more of a sense of how you would communicate some of these ideas and how they could use them in their particular events. So, Kris, I thank you for the vulnerability in your book, and I thank you for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much, Kirby. God bless you and your ministry as well.
That's all we have for today. Let me just mention that, again, if you wanted some more material, it is available at our website, pointofview.net, and so I would encourage you to go there and find out more. If you find yourself saying, I really would like to hear this again, or I know somebody that would really benefit from hearing this interview, you can, of course, download the podcast and send it to someone or listen to it again. Or, of course, you can also go to our YouTube channel and find it and use that and send it on to others. So take the time, if you can, to benefit from this, if you'd like to listen to it again, or to pass it on to others that would benefit from this. And as I've said at the very beginning, we certainly salute those of you that have served in the military, and especially those of you that lost a loved one in the process. I want to thank everybody who's been involved in this broadcast. Andrew and Steve, I'll see you back here tomorrow, right here on Point of View.
It wasn't long ago it seemed every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who